which is at the archive of the Smithsonian Institute, saying that he visited Flushing in April of 1790. He says, "I visited today the Prince Nurseries with Vice President Adams." And the Prince Nursery, which was at Prince Street and Northern Boulevard, was the first commercial nursery in North America. First place in North America in the New World to sell trees, plants, fruit, seeds. All right, the first commercial nursery. It was called the Linnaeus Gardens. And he wrote in his diary, "Today I visited the Prince Nursery at Flushing, Long Island. It failed to meet my expectation." And that he found Mr. Prince's selection to be a trifle, to be trifling, to be very little in size and scope. And then he criticized the people of Flushing because they only gave him a single cannon salute instead of a 21-gun salute. And then he punctuated that by saying, "I guess it's all the fair citizens could muster." So we thank you, George, for the plug of our great village of Flushing. And yeah. Oh, sure. Absolutely. Sure. Yeah, these guys were in the business, so to speak. Yeah, so he wasn't that impressed. And they had prepared, right? They had prepared a huge banquet for him at the intersection of Northern Boulevard and Main Street that he didn't stay. So because he kept going, so much food had been prepared, all the people looked at each other and went, "It's ours." So everybody in the village ate it except for him. All right, so they all took part. 1790. At the time of the Revolution, Flushing was occupied by the British. Queens was pro-Tory, which means that we were pro-England. We didn't want to become our own country. What use? We're part of the great empire, the British Empire. What's all this new country nonsense? So the rebels had small bases located obviously in eastern Long Island, which was predominantly occupied by the British. The British Army quickly took Flushing because they knew that it was a British stronghold, so they wanted to, because it was heavily populated by British, they didn't want any interference, any internal problems having. The Quaker Meeting House on Northern became a hospital and garrison, and on Northern and Main was erected the whipping post, where people were whipped for going against the crown. Okay? And this was the time of the Revolution. The 2nd Battalion was located in Jamaica, off of Jamaica Avenue. And Nathaniel Woodhull, a famous member of Washington's spy ring, was captured at 190th Street and Jamaica Avenue at the Tavern of Increase Carpenter. And the British brought him out into the front yard right on 190th and Jamaica Avenue. And they told him, "Show your allegiance to the king," and he said no. And they said, "Say, God save the king," and he said, "God save us all." So one of the redcoats took his saber and cut him, almost amputating his arm. And in those days, because of lack thereof of medical attention, the wound became infected, and within less than 3 or 4 days, he was dead. In Whitestone, overlooking the East River, right by Whitestone Park, was the property that belonged to Francis Lewis, the great signer of the Declaration of Independence. Francis Lewis was one of the very few members of the Continental Congress who was British born. So he was from England. He was not from the colony. So since he signed the Declaration, the British took that as real slight. So they sent, under the orders of General Howe, a battalion of redcoats was dispatched in 1776 to his property in Whitestone, where they burnt down his homestead and killed all of his cattle. And then they demanded that he come out and receive his punishment, but he was still in Maryland, okay? Or rather, in Philadelphia. Well, no, but that's his livestock. That's what they use for sustenance, for trade, and its value. So the British did something that they had never done before. They said, well, if he's not here, is his wife here? So they arrested her, and they put her in a wallabout prison ship just where the Statue of Liberty is located today. And General George Washington called a ceasefire, and demanded to meet with the British authorities, and they met, And they said, why are we stopping this? And he said, look, we don't take women prisoners. You have to, and they said no, and it went back and forth for a couple days, and then they said, well, you have a couple of our people. Fine. So they did a prison swap. But she had, during that time, been starved. And for that entire time, although it was just a few weeks, had not received any food or water, and was so physically and emotionally ill that she died several months after. Okay? And today, if you go to St. George's Church on Main Street in Flushing, or Grace Episcopal Church in Whitestone on the 14th Avenue, there are stained glass windows dedicated to Francis Lewis. So, after the Revolutionary War, through the early 1800s, I know I'm fast forwarding ahead, through the time of the Civil War, Queens was predominantly agricultural. All right, and if it wasn't agricultural, as in farms, it was desolate. Nobody lived here. So many parts of our great borough were so scantily populated, and the terrain was wild, with rivers and creeks, swamps everywhere, woods, fields, gigantic boulders, some of them half the size of this room. Those are known as erratics from the glacier from thousands of years previous. The terrain was absolutely wild and unpredictable, and it varied wherever you went. So even where I'm from, Whitestone is named after the White Stone, a gigantic boulder that was left by the Wisconsin Glacier 10,000 years earlier on the beachfront, and the settlers there called it Whitestone because it was like an anomaly, right? So it wasn't until just before the Civil War that industry came to Queens, the casket company, and then after the Civil War, you had the industrial boom. And thus, with the industrial boom came the beginning of the Queens that we know. The seeds are now being planted. Industry comes to Queens. If you lived in College Point, it was owned by a man named Conrad Poppenhusen, who established the first rubber factories. Okay, Poppenhuisen, or it's pronounced Poppenhuisen, I learned recently. Poppenhuisen, who hired predominantly German people to work in his rubber factory. If you lived in Whitestone, you were probably employed by the John Locke Stamping Company or the Samuel Leggett Stamping Company. Does anybody know what stamping is? Stamping is when you go into an old establishment, maybe anywhere in the city, and you look at the ceiling, right, and there are those beautiful copper, the tin roof with the squares and the beautiful molding. Well, that entire ceiling is one gigantic thing that is installed. And those designs, that's called stamping. And the stamping mill was in Whitestone. So when you go into an old barbershop or grocery store or any establishment in the Fibros that's from like the late 1800s, and you look up and you see that ceiling, it was probably manufactured in Whitestone at the Leggett and Locke factory, which the building, by the way, still stands on 10th Avenue and Clintonville Street, oddly enough. If you lived in Woodhaven, which was known as East, or part of what was an extension of East New York, you worked at the Grosling Porcelain Ware Factory. So many different places, and on and on. If you lived in Corona, you probably worked at the glass furnaces of Louis Tiffany, the Tiffany glass, right? All Queens Museum, that's all from the glass, which I remember that factory. I remember the metal blast windows to keep the heat, on the outside. I remember that as a kid. And now there's a public school there called the Louis Comfort Tiffany Public School. So that was the beginning of industry. And with industry came development. But there was another thing that happened at this time in the early 1830s. It started in Brooklyn and it expanded to Queens, and that was known as the railroad. The railroad came to Queens. And it came here in the form of the industrialists of the borough creating their own railroad lines to carry people to their towns, which would thus increase production, and then those very trains would carry the products that they produced. So it was like a nice little circle that they had, all right? You had all kinds of independent lines, railroad lines, crisscrossing the borough in the 1840s and 50s. In fact, there was a train station that was on Queens Boulevard and Broadway, one block up into Broadway. If you get to the intersection going west, you make a right. Half a block up, there was a train station there. And that train station would take you from that point all the way to Garden City. And it was called the White Line because all the cars on the train were painted white. And it lasted for 7 years. And that's it. And it was created by Alexander Stewart, as in Stewart Avenue in Garden City, to carry people east. So then finally by the 1850s, 1860s, the Long Island Railroad is expanding. So they start buying out all of these independent railroad lines. And thus you have the Port Washington branch, this branch, that branch, Jamaica. That's how it happened. And in fact, there was a Long Island Railroad train that ran from Whitestone from 1869 to 1932. And it would leave Whitestone and go into Flushing and then go to Woodside, and you would transfer from there to go to Penn Station. So if you lived in Whitestone in the 1920s, you had access to Penn Station. It was 20 minutes. Then in 1932, the LIRR pulled the railroad. Most people living in Beechhurst, Whitestone, had bought their houses because they had a railroad. They also bought their homes, but they didn't bother buying a car because they had a railroad. And because there was a railroad, there was no bus service. So, and it was the Great Depression. So people didn't have money to buy a car, and the city didn't have enough money to expand bus service. So for 2 or 3 years, yeah, it was really rough living in that part of Queens. And then bus service came in, and et cetera. But another thing that was part of development was community development. People used their money back in those days. They didn't depend on the government for everything. They depended on themselves. And any person with means would come forward with their money to establish services. Poppin, Husen, and Leggett, they brought the railroad in. Mary Elizabeth Shaw used her fortune to establish wonderful services. Anybody know about Mary Elizabeth Shaw? No. Mary Elizabeth Shaw was the richest African-American woman in the borough of Queens. And right before her passing, she used her money to help finance the Tuskegee Institute, the Flushing Female Academy, which was the first free school for young black girls, which was located where municipal parking lot number 1 is across from the 109th. The school is not there anymore. It was an extension of the AME Macedonian Church, which is gone. I miss it very much. That church they were very helpful to me years ago when I was doing the history of Flushing. It was an amazing thing when they tore it down to expand the parking lot. She also helped establish the Queens Library in Flushing, and the rest of her fortune went to establish the very facility where I would be born in 1981, and that's Flushing Hospital. And that's the original Flushing Hospital that she helped found in the 1880s. That's the inside of the hospital, of the old building. Yes, you see me right there. There I am. Ironically, the previous building was torn down. In the 1920s, a brick structure was erected, and that's where this photo was taken. And if you go there today, they're about to tear that building down. Oh. Yeah. So a lot more development occurs. So we have the railroad, we have the factories, and we have the towns. Flushing, Whitestone, all of these towns are colonial towns. Not Woodside. Jamaica, okay, these are all colonial era villages. Flushing Township is one of the oldest villages in the United States. It goes back to 1643. All right, and it's never been known by any other name. It's always been known as Vlissingen/Flushing during its entire existence. But soon, with the development and with increased population, other towns start happening. Other phenomena in American life come up that creates more communities and people. And what is this phenomenon? Well, in 1869, there's a new industry out called real estate. What is real estate? No one knows what that is. You would buy your land in a land trade or deal. You would be the one to build the house, okay? Or the homes were hand-me-downs. All right, you lived in a log cabin or a home made out of stone, all right, with a thatched roof or with a roof made out of clay. shingles or basically limbs cut from trees. It was very, very medieval. All right, and this is how land was bought and sold. And then in 1870, a publisher of sheet music by the name of Benjamin Hitchcock comes to Queens by way of Brooklyn and starts roaming around the area down by the Penny Bridge, which is now the Kosciuszko Bridge, down by Calvary Cemetery, Winfield, Woodside, that whole area, Blissville. And he starts going around to all the old homesteads. And he asks people, are you selling? He said, selling for what? He goes, do you want to sell me your land or your home? I'll give you a lot of money. And most of them said, yeah, I don't have any family, and this is very strange. Where am I going to go? He said, you go wherever you want. I'm going to give you a lot of money. And he had convinced several banks to loan him hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, which in those days was a lot, to buy the home. But now that money has to be paid back to the bank. And who would pay it back would be the person who now owns the property. And the lure of the deal was, you don't have to buy the land and build your home. We'll build the home for you. You're going to buy a ready-made home. Wow, okay, well that makes it easier. So that payback to the bank at a very small percentage was known as the installment plan. We know it today as the mortgage. And that is where the mortgage began in the town of Woodside. The original modern day occupants of Woodside in the 1870s were the first people in this country to buy into a mortgage. And it was first, like, word spread that it was like a Ponzi scheme, that this is very strange. I mean, it was like the Bitcoin of its time. Now, I'm not comparing it to Bitcoin, but it was a new way of doing business. And he said, no, it's not a Ponzi scheme. I make money, they can buy a home, it's a business. And suddenly, after a year of debate of whether it was a Ponzi scheme, it was noted that it wasn't a scheme. This is a new form of industry, and overnight, real estate developers appeared across the landscape of the 5 boroughs. Jeremiah Johnson, all these different realtors, Asher, all these different companies that you see during the 1870s and 80s sprung up to compete against Benjamin W. Hitchcock and his installment plan, which they laughed at him at the beginning, but they weren't laughing anymore because he became very, very rich. Okay? And it was funny because when he passed away in 1910, his obituary in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle is one sentence. It says, Benjamin W. Hitchcock passed away today in Brooklyn, New York. He was involved in real estate. That's it. That's it. No photo, no mention of who he was. And when I did a chapter on him in my new book, and it literally took half of the time to write the book was to research him. That's how scant the information was, but I found it. I had to dig. So with the creation of these new towns and this new industry, we'll do one second, I'll get to the question in a moment. They need to populate the area. Well, there's no industry in certain areas. How are you going to bring people? So thus begins the railroad, and certain types of transportation come into existence that didn't exist a generation before that will increase the population. New technologies that didn't exist. So now by the 1880s, early 1900s, another technology comes along. Building bridges, right? Modern day bridges. So in 1909, the Queensboro Bridge is built to link Manhattan with Queens. And that was the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, whichever way you want to look at it. But the population of Queens multiplies tenfold, literally, within a few months. As the decades progress, more and more people, more and more neighborhoods, and then in the World War I era comes the creation of the dual contract, the BMT and the IRT, the number 7 train. And as the 7 train works its way out east, more and more neighborhoods are created around it. The neighborhoods follow the railroad. And that is why in this photo, which looks like from The Sound of Music, right? This could have been taken anywhere in the world. I could tell you that this is Sweden. I could tell you that this is Switzerland, right? Here you have the beautiful grist mill or the mill house of the Fish family. and also once belonged to the Jackson family, as in Jackson Avenue, as in Northern Boulevard. And that's the Jackson Mill Creek, and that is the Jackson homestead behind the mill. This photo looks like it's from 200 plus years ago. The picture was taken in 1930. The reason it was taken, that's a misprint. It's 1890, but this particular photo is 1920. And the reason, or closer to 1930. And the reason for this is because several years after this photo was taken, the river, the footbridge, the house and the mill were torn down. And within 3 years, just 36 months, it went from looking like this to 94th Street and the Grand Central Parkway. The river became the parkway, the footbridge became 94th Street, and the homestead in the back are the American airline hangars. Wow. You remember those old hangars from the 30s and 40s that were there? That's where this is. And that's how quickly the transition took. There's another shot of the mill.
Is that a WBA project?
Oh yeah. So, this is another, how am I doing on time? Good? A few more minutes, 5? Yeah. 10? 10? 9, okay. 8.
8 with questions, and plus some questions.
Oh, okay.
Limited questions.
So I'll forward along. So that is how the Borough of Queens has evolved. These are photos that are taken from our archive. Main Street, right? Main Street, Flushing. Okay, this is Main Street looking from Northern. This is from 1944. One of the things I love about these photos is that because they were professionally done, they are razor sharp. Because the negative, everybody remember negatives? Remember we had to take a photo and go get them developed? Well, the negatives in those days were still made on glass, not celluloid. And because it was glass, the crystal in the glass made it crystal clear. That's where the term comes from. And that's why it's razor sharp. And you could zoom all the way in to almost see a person's hairline. And you can see it with such beautiful detail. And what's ironic is that in 2010, I stood at this intersection waiting for the Q15 bus and watched as the demolition company tore down these two buildings right here. Everything's been torn down. This is 1913. This is 82nd Street and Roosevelt Avenue in Jackson Heights. Can you see it fine? Yeah, sure. So, and this is the construction of Roosevelt Avenue in 1913 in anticipation of the IRT of the number 7 train coming overhead. This is in Douglaston. This is still there. This is right off of the LIE by the old Douglaston Shopping Center. This is white stone. And it says, General George Washington traveled this road on his tour of Long Island April 24, 1790. And was put there by the Daughters of the American Revolution, 1934. That stone is still there. It doesn't say no, it doesn't. The Matinacock chapter, you notice that, right? Yep. This, believe it or not, this is the intersection where these young cadets are crossing. This is the Kyle Institute. This is a military academy for German children. Kyle's Institute, that was located in Flushing. And you see they're crossing these tracks, and there's a sign that says danger, railroad crossing. This is the Port Washington, this is the LIRR crossing in Main Street in Flushing, where the little pizzeria used to be. All right, so this is where they're crossing right here. And a block down on the left would be St. George's Church. This is Ida Smith. She's one of the first female postal workers for the United Postal Service, and she worked in the Little Neck station for the post office. Little unknown fact. Been researching Ida Smith These are people waiting for the bus in Flushing. And now it's 10,000. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in. Let's look at the people on this spring day in 1944. All dressed up. What do we notice about them? Hats. They're not smiling. They look rather tired, right?
Yeah.
It's the end of the day. It's the rush hour. It's commuting.
Where the hell is the bus?
Where the hell is the bus? And you'll notice something. Is this gentleman from the MTA with the hat on? Anybody know what his position was? Was to push you on, and then cut the line when the bus became too crowded. Also, another interesting thing is that you'll notice in this photo, here comes the bus, but you'll notice that the street, aside from that sole bus, is very clear, right? There's not a lot of cars, there's not a lot of buses, it's just a bus. Well, why is that? On Roosevelt and Union Street is the Macy's. That Macy's, before it was Macy's, was a bus depot. There was a Port Authority style structure in that whole super block. And that is where all the buses would leave from, as to not crowd Main Street. And now this is the busiest intersection in New York City. It's officially busier than Times Square. This is Main and Northern. This is another photo looking the other way. Look at how the ladies are dressed. You like your shoes? But look at the stores, look at the storefronts, look at what they're selling, look at the prices. The clarity on these photos are amazing, how professionally they were done. And these were all done for the Queens Topographical Bureau and for the City of New York. This is June 9th, 1943 at 6:09 p.m. And I'm going to close out on this photo. This is Nassau Boulevard from Main Street, 1928. Today, this is the Long Island Expressway at Main Street intersection. There's a Jerry's Hardware store. Jerry's Hardware store is right here with his grassy patches. Just to give you an idea of where you're looking. This is 1928. Nassau Boulevard became World's Fair Boulevard, which then became Horace Harding Boulevard, and then the LIE and the service roads. That's why the service roads have a different name. No, this is Nassau Boulevard east from Main Street. So this is, will be on the other side. I know, if you're going west, it's on the right. If you're going east, it's on the left. Okay, so it's this patch of grass over here, I'm sorry. We go from one to the other. We're on the wrong side, it's okay. And this is a really cool photo, we'll end on this. And this is the building of the IRT, of the number 7 train, as it comes down Roosevelt Avenue, heading into Flushing. And you can see the surveyor standing there watching them put on the finishing touches of the superstructure. And in the background, you can see the tower of the U-Haul building, which used to be the Serval Zipper Company by College Point Boulevard. And here he is, stands alone, watching. And it hasn't been maintained since, right? So look, as you can see, this sort of thing could go on for hours and hours. It is so much to talk about. Every photo you could spend at least a half hour on describing what's in it, how it came to be, who built it, why they built it, etc. And it shows you this is just the head of the needle. This is the tip of the iceberg of what is going on here and what is yet to come. All right, we got a lot of things coming up for the building of the borough. We have many different things here, and of course, another revolutionary thing we talked about, the law of 1638 with immigration. Well, 1965 is the next immigration law that allows people from Eastern Europe and from the Near and Far East and from Asia and from Middle East to come to the United States. It's the It's the immigration bill that my father came here under from Greece in 1968, and that led to the creation and also the establishment of the 64-65 World's Fair with all of the different pavilions. People who were hired to man those pavilions from those respective countries, they ended up staying. And that, including with the immigration bill 2 years later, created the diversity and the multicultural aspect that we have in the borough of Queens today. It was those two things.
Are you gonna have a part two?
We will definitely have a part 2, maybe part 3. We could go on. So in the last 2 minutes, I'll open it up to questions, but I do thank you very, very much for coming here tonight. Thank you.